children to be faithful to God, I intentionally bring them to church, right? Yeah, that's true. But is that the only thing that I'm going to be doing or should be doing? Do you think that they're just going to, you just tell them, you should study the Bible? How many kids are going to go, okay, and they go to their room and they pull their Bible out and they start studying? There'll be a few, right? But most likely, what is it that he tells them to do? Does he tell them that? That's how you teach your children? No. Absolutely. It's an everyday process. It's one of the things that you do every day, and you take the little things of life and you apply God to them and make them stand out in their lives. Whatever you're doing. I've known guys that went hunting with their kids, and they make that happen. They draw God into that, about the creatures, about creation, and it's anything. And there's many ways you can do that. But you take every day and you tie it to God. And you make your children understand that everything about their life is tied to God. Doesn't matter what you're doing. Whether you're working, whether you're, one of the things that they may not like is if you have a garden and you got to go out and hoe weeds. How many kids love that? Right? No. But what if you talk to them about God while you're out there doing that? I always brought up the point of this is Adam's fault is why I'm doing this, right? Right? I had my own take as a child biblically about that. But we use the everyday thoughts of life and we bring them back to God. That's how we teach our children. When you rise up, when you lie down, when you walk by the way, put them on your doorpost. It's one of those things that people, and you can take that any way you want. The whole idea is surround your children, surround the younger generation with God and His Word. Incorporate it into their life, and it will stick. It will stick. Because there's so many things that are out there that are calling for their attention. We have to be intentional on doing those things. We can't just come home when we're tired from work. And I've done it, but you come home when you're tired and you click on the TV, and by the time you know it, it's 11 o'clock and the kids are already in bed and you haven't read the Bible with them, you haven't talked with them about that. It's very easy to get into and it's very hard to get out of. So it does have to be a very intentional thing. Absolutely. He said you have to lead by example. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about is this idea of mentoring is not just passing along information. While it's good, that's not the only thing about mentoring. Mentoring is not only passing along information, but showing by example and what you're going to do. And we'll get into some of that in just a minute. Josh? Mm-hmm. Sure. Mm-hmm. Yep. So Josh brings up the passage in Malachi chapter 2 about what God's purpose was for the children of Israel, that they became faithless, and his whole purpose or his whole idea there was to teach them that I want godly offspring. That's why you need to be this. This is his intention for that. And yes, you're true. There's a lot of people that they're not going to have children of their own, and that's okay. But we still need to teach our children, but we also need to teach everyone else's children too, right? We need to teach a younger generation. If we are to grow the church like God wants it to be, we have to take it upon ourselves to do that. And that's a great point, Josh. So flip over to Matthew chapter 22. And again, I don't know if this is going to come out right or not. So we talked about family mentoring. That's one purpose that God has in mentoring, is to make sure that our family is mentored. Another part of this, as another example, is as Jesus in Matthew chapter 22, is community. Matthew 22, verse 36, another familiar passage for Bible students. Let's start in verse 34. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which is the great commandment of the law? And he said to him, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And a second is like unto it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. So, we talked last time about mentoring and how it's based on relationships. And you really do have to get the relationship going before you can mentor. But in the community process of mentoring, right, the people that are around us, he said, love your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. That's another study in and of itself, right, of how we accomplish that. But also, we love our neighbor as ourselves. How easy is that to do? Sometimes it is. A lot of times it's not. You can say the same thing maybe about your family too, right? Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. But I think there is a purpose in here of Jesus saying this, that it puts upon his children the idea of it's not just about people in these four walls, right? If we're not careful, we can live our whole lives within these four walls spiritually and never share the gospel with anybody. Is that what God wants? Absolutely not. Is that what we want? Absolutely not. I know we don't. Now, why don't we do that sometimes? What's your number one reason? Fear? Yeah. What is it about fear? What you say fear, and that's a great answer. But what do you fear when we aren't sharing the gospel, or we're leery to do that? We're nervous about doing that. What do we fear? Rejection? Saying the wrong thing, and that's a little wisdom in that one, right? Okay, questions that they ask that we may not be able to answer. Those are all great answers, and they're all real. Okay? How do we overcome those? Carlton, do you have a comment? Sure. Okay. Sometimes we may not be living the gospel ourselves. I mean, that's a true statement. And so we feel like, well, I can't go teach them if I can't get it right. How do we overcome those? Love? A compassion? Okay. Yeah. I think we put too much pressure on ourselves from the standpoint that I got to have every answer to every question. And we all realize that, and we need to understand that we have all the answers right here. That doesn't mean I have them all here. And that seems to fade as years go by, right? But we do have the purpose in that. Eddie?
more willing to accept that.
Sure.
But if you start might have it.
Sure.
That feeling, find that one.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and what Eddie was saying was just look for the few that are there, and they'll all come around eventually. I mean, some won't, but some will. What do you have to do prior to going outside of these four walls? How do you have to prepare yourself? You have to study. You have to be knowledgeable. You have to be a child of God, a genuine child of God. That doesn't mean we're going to have faults and we're going to fall. God knows that. But we're not pursuing sin and then living a lie, right? Because that won't work. But I think also we need to establish the relationships. I think that's a key. You mentioned at the workplace. At the workplace, people see you day in and day out. Where I work, we hire from a temp to hire. So we go through a temp agency. And the reason we started doing that was because I can only get to know you in a 10-minute interview. You could lie to my face and I couldn't tell you because I don't know you. But they have a 90-day window that you're on probation. Okay? You think in 90 days I can get to know you and you can get to know me 8 hours a day? Probably so. You can get to know the real person, how they react to things, how they react to difficulties, how they treat others, all those types of things. So you have to build this relationship, and if the relationship is working, then you can hire them. It makes sense, and it's worked pretty well. I think before we go outside and teach those that are around us, knock on a door to a total stranger, we need to build relationships with those people that we know in our circle. Everybody has their circle. And I don't mean that as a cliquish thing. I mean, you have the people that you go to work with. That's your circle. Outside of these four walls. And they know you and you know them. It may be your neighborhood, the people that you live around. We need to build those relationships. And I'm talking about nothing about God or anything. I'm just talking about having somebody over for supper, getting to know them. At work, just getting to know somebody, what they like, what they don't like, all these different things. And the reason, why is it that we need to build that first? Trust and credibility, absolutely. If I go to Ethan, and we've never met, and I said, put my arm around him, I said, Ethan, you're going to be my mentee. I'm going to be your mentor. All right, let's go. What do you think Ethan's going to look at me? Like, no, who are you, nut job? I don't know you. And then I start talking to him about the Bible. Well, he just took it another step, right? Like, he's really crazy. I mean, that's what I'm saying is, they need to know that I'm a Christian, that I strive to be a Christian, that I'm fallible, that I make mistakes. I think that's one of the biggest things that I've learned in working with people or in the workplace. They think, and I've heard it so many times, these church people, they'll have somebody that's difficult, that's with another church or something, and they'll say, these church people are just ridiculous. I said, what do you mean by that? Well, they're so angry and ugly and things. And I said, well, do you think everybody's like that? Well, no. Okay. Well, then you got to back up a little bit. But you get people thinking, they have a bad experience with one person, and they think everybody's like that. But you start building a relationship, and you use that as a place of basis to talk about. Listen, I'm a Christian, And you know my flaws, right? You know when I get angry and I shouldn't. You know when I yell and I shouldn't. You know all those types of things. But does that make me somebody who God doesn't want? Does that make me a hypocrite? That just makes me a fallible Christian that I need to work on some things, right? Because one of the conversations I had with a coworker about that, and she said she had a bad experience with somebody from a church, and she made the point that they aren't church people. And I said, well, isn't that really where they need to be? Like, if you think that they're mean, that's probably where they need to be. That's, I think sometimes the world thinks that because you go to church, that you're these holy Christian, infallible people. I think that's real, and I think that's out there. And I think that's a wall that we need to be broken down. Now, do we strive for that? Absolutely. But I always point people back to 1 Corinthians. This is a lesson that Nate gave years ago. Read through 1 Corinthians, the first 10 chapters. And think about it from the lessons of who those people are and what he's dealing with. And then at the end of the chapter, he calls them brethren. These are people that were doing things that we would think, this is just ridiculous. They're suing each other. They're lying to each other. They're sleeping with each other. They had sexual immorality within the church. But they were brethren. They had problems. We're brethren and we have problems, right? And we have to be careful that we don't start looking down that holier-than-thou attitude, right? Because that's where it misdirects people. So, bringing that back to mentoring. Before we leave these four walls, we need to build the relationships. Because if I have a relationship now, at least that girl knows we've had a conversation, we've had some disagreement maybe, but we've had some explanation, and we didn't even bail off into Scripture. But now there's a relationship that's building. Now do you think if I go back later and say, hey, what about this? Would you be willing to sit down and study this about how people need to conduct their lives? Is she going to be more eager to do that than some stranger off the street? Absolutely, because she knows me, and we've built even if it's a small relationship, it's a relationship. We have interacted on a daily basis. And so I think we've done ourselves some disservice in years past of we're just going to walk up to a stranger, knock on the door, and teach them the gospel. Now, does that work? Sometimes. Yeah, sometimes it does. So I'm not going to say they were wrong for doing that. That's not it. But I think to build those relationships first is what Jesus is talking about, and that's built on love. And it helps us to overcome our fears. Because the fear of rejection is real. What did God tell, was it Samuel? When they wanted kings? What did Samuel say to God? Do you remember? Exactly. Samuel said, sorry, God. He said, don't worry about it. They're not rejecting you. They're rejecting me. Samuel had that rejection deal going on, right? He's like, I let you down, God, because now they want kings, and that was my fault. And God said, no. That's not what it is. So we take biblical characters, we see that, and that rejection fear is true. I mean, it's a real thing. So we can't just sweep it under the rug and say it's not real. It is. But we have to overcome those things. And we have to overcome them with, I think, what Cherie said, the love. Jesus said, love God with all your heart, soul, and your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. Do you try to take care of yourself spiritually? Then why should we not try to take care of our neighbor spiritually? And that's one of the things we do. And we need to, just for Stan talking, we need to get out of the idea that it's our duty to do that. Now, is it our duty? Sure, God wants us to do that. But I think it's one of the things that I need to change my mentality that I get to share that. because I think it's a thing, and it's a very minor thing, but I think it's a very important thing. I need to ask myself, what has God done for me? Because if I'm going to love my neighbor as myself, then I need to ask myself, what did God do for me? And list it out. God, he gave his only son, the only son he had, he gave it for me, for Stan. He gave Stan a way to get out of the way he was going, which was not a good place, and he gave him hope. He gave me hope. He gave me a future. He gave me all these things. I can appreciate those things. I don't think we think about those things enough in this realm to understand how blessed we really are and how happy we should be to share what exactly Jesus gave me. I think that's a little baggage that those, and I do this in a lot of classes. If you were raised in the church, raise your hand if you know what that means. Okay, let's do it the other way. If you weren't raised in the church, okay, so we have a few, but the majority were raised in the church, right? Your parents brought you here. They did a good job. They did Deuteronomy 6, right? They did what they were supposed to do as parents. But, and I may have to have a discussion with all those that raised their hands that weren't grown up in the church. I think part of growing up in the church, we take for granted sometimes what God has done for us because it's what we've known our whole lives. We were brought to church when we were little, our whole lives. And it bears saying that if we're not careful, it goes back to Deuteronomy 6. We could become entitled. We could think this is our place. I've been here all my life. This is not ours. This is God's. And you understand that purpose. Those that weren't raised in the church, and I'll ask you, if you will, to comment on this. What is it that do you see a difference in people like you? Oh, that's a word, right? It's a good way to say it, but from your experience, maybe to versus somebody like me who was raised in the church, as far as how you appreciate those things, what God did for you. Anybody? That's okay. I mean, that's not fine. One of the things, though, I think, just from my perspective, and it may be wrong, but it's that you had nothing and you were given something. Where somebody's raised in the church, you never really didn't have anything. I mean, yes, you were, but it's kind of a weird thing. Pardon? Do you have a comment? Oh, sorry.
I've seen it.
Mm-hmm.
Christ. And it's hard to believe that. But I will say, I came to Christ. I was a Christian. That's what you come. And it is because I have and he didn't say anything about death. Come go with me. Like him.
Sure. I think that's a great example because it backs me up. No, just kidding. He was saying that, if you didn't hear him, that he lived that example. There was somebody that he knew and respected that asked him to go to church. And he did that because of the respect and the relationship that they had. And so that's what it takes. I think that's where it does. And you're right. You can't just paint a broad brushstroke on these types of things because there are people who were raised in the church who are very diligent for God. But I think we need to be careful from that standpoint we talked about in Deuteronomy of not taking that for granted. Carlton?
Where we grew up,
parable.
Mm-hmm.
One man owed so much, that's broke.
Sure. So Carlton was saying it depends on the people, individuals, what they've been through. He talked about the parable of the debt. Who's going to love him more? Those that had much debt or less debt, those kind of things. So I think that's a good statement too. So, yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Good point. So if you didn't hear Margaret, she was saying that you don't have to be the main teacher to influence somebody to God. What was your name? Greg. Just like Greg said, he had an influence that just invited him to church, invited him to Bible study, invited him to worship. Same thing with your parents. And that's an easy thing for us to do. Because you can have somebody come into this auditorium and they can hear the gospel. Now that's another story, if where you're going to church and what they teach. But I'm confident in this place that they'll hear the Bible taught. They'll know. And so when they come and go, at some point in time, they're going to have to make a decision in their life because they'll start questioning those things because they'll be taught from here. Sure. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and it's the parable of the persistent, and you continue to be that. You build, and you're still building a relationship, right? Even if they don't come the first time or the second or the third, you're building that relationship. They know that this is important to you and that you think it's important for them. So there's something that's to be said there, Renee.
I was just they build relations.
Yes.
Sometimes work or school and world, but we never. We're just that's
Yeah.
and we just it's right. We're living, not taking away.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, and that's a great point too, because I thought this in my past, that if I just live in a godly life, they're going to see that, and that'll be my teaching. And is that true? Absolutely. But if you never reach out to them, some people will never come the other way. They'll never step up. It may take you reaching out, your friend reaching out to you, your neighbor reaching out to your parents. It wasn't them that did that. So living the example is a true statement, and it's very important, but you also have to reach out. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, you have the example of the Ethiopian eunuch. He needed somebody to show him the way. Yeah. Anybody else? We're running out of time. This is a great discussion because I think it's very important for mentoring. We can put it under the term of mentoring, but it's really living Christian life, isn't it? But we can put it in there. So basically the relationships are something that we have to value, and we have to start there. That's where we have to start, and I think that will solve a lot of the problems, the fear that we have of reaching out to other people. Because if you reach out to a stranger, that's one reason I think I admire people that are really good in sales, because they have overcome the fear of rejection. I tried it one time. And I was like, people told me no, and I was like, I'm done with this. I can't handle this. I don't like people telling me no. But they have overcome that. They understand that there's something more to that. Josh? Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's a great point to kind of end on. What Josh was saying was sometimes we make it about us. We make that that we have got to convert them. No, we have to just deliver the message. And you know what? Sometimes we build up this message like we've got to have a 4-point sermon, 45-minute sermon. No, think about what God did for you and share that. That's it. Keep it that simple. And that will start the ball rolling. But we make it too many times about, well, if I share this and then they walk away, then that's on me. Isn't that what Samuel said? And what did God say to Samuel? They didn't reject you, they rejected me. Yes, ma'am.
I was just
Yeah. Yeah, I think she brings up a good point about if you saw people in the realm of if they're drowning, would you just throw it to them one time and then go, well, you didn't grab it, sorry. No, you'd keep on going and you might even jump in, right? I mean, there's been many, many people that's done that before. But yeah, that's a great point, that we need to see the value and how important that is. But we need to take ourselves out of the equation. We need to build that relationship, take ourselves out of the equation, understand that it's God, the one that is saving. We're just supposed to share it. And we need to love them as much as we love ourselves. That's what Jesus is asking us to do. Anything else, final things before we quit? Yes, ma'am.
And say, oh God, this is hard for me. I'm sure the right person to say.
Yeah.
But we have the people that has God, that this is what we're seeking to do.
Yeah, that's a great point to add to that we don't need to forget the power of prayer. We can ask God, listen, help me to say the right things. And he'll do it. Help me to get out of the way. Because that's sometimes what I need the biggest help to do, get myself out of the way. We'll pick up there on Wednesday. Thank you all for your comments.